On our newscast tonight, welfare programs, tax hikes, and policy coordination. These are some of the topics discussed at this month's extraordinary parliamentary session. Blame the low birth rate and longer life expectancy. A new report shows more and more senior citizens will be returning to the workforce as time goes by here in Korea. Tax the rich to support the middle class. That's the gist of Obama's new budget plan, which is highly likely to face strong opposition from the Republican-controlled Congress. Stay with us for these and more. Welcome to Early Edition at 6, live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Daniel Che.
And I'm Nahyun Kyung. Very good to have you with us.
Well, the government has come under fire recently over the outcome of its tax policy revisions and sudden backtracking on plans to revamp the national health insurance program.
Well, in a likely response to her falling approval ratings, President Park Geun-hye ordered the cabinet and her office staff to better consult before putting the policies in place. Choi Yu-sun has our top story.
Amid a public backlash over the government's tax policy revisions and its suspension of reforms to the national health insurance program, President Park Geun-hye called for greater coordination between the cabinet and her office. The cabinet and her secretaries recently launched a regular consultative meeting, and President Park asked both sides to thoroughly discuss each and every policy before implementing them. She emphasized that officials must clearly understand how a policy will affect the lives of the public through simulations and data analyses. Otherwise, she said, its purpose will eventually be defeated. The president did not, however, respond to the ruling party's calls for administration to decide between increasing taxes to add welfare benefits or scaling down on welfare to avoid raising taxes. Earlier on Tuesday, ruling party leader Kim Moo-sung had heavily criticized President Park's election pledge to increase welfare without a tax hike.
A recent poll showed 65% of Korean people thought it would be impossible to expand welfare without raising taxes. I agree with them, and it would be wrong for a politician to deceive the public by promising more welfare without raising taxes.
Instead, Kim said the priority should be to review where the welfare budget is being spent and to seek ways to reduce expenses before opting to raise taxes. As for the government's backtracking on health insurance reforms, Kim vowed to initiate better communication between the party, government, and presidential office. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Well, the president's comments come after the newly elected floor leader of the ruling Saenuri Party, Yoo Seung-min, called for changes to regain the public's trust.
Well, Mr. Yoo says both the president and the ruling party are facing a crisis unless something is done. For more, here's our Lee Ji-yoon.
For the ruling party's new floor leader, Yoo Seung-min, his win wasn't about an anti-President Park Geun-hye camp defeating a pro-Park faction. For him, it signaled a chance for the ruling camp to reform and rebound ahead of next year's general elections. With President Park's approval ratings at their lowest level since she took office, Yoo is calling for policy changes to win back the hearts of a disappointed public. Pointing to criticism of the president's personnel picks, Yoo told reporters that President Park must carry out a drastic shakeup of her people. As for policymaking, he believes the party should take a stance vis-a-vis the presidential office. To do that, he says the party should no longer just support whatever the presidential office lays out in front of them. Instead, the party should play a leading role in setting the agenda for the nation. Yoo, however, did promise to improve communications and cooperation with the government to iron out differences before putting major policies into motion. In response to the government's push to increase taxes to cover welfare benefits, he said it's either higher taxes with more benefits or lower taxes with less welfare, not more welfare without a tax hike. Political analysts say the new floor leader's eagerness for change could turn the page for the ruling camp. But it remains to be seen whether the presidential office will lend an ear to his criticisms and demands. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
And in other domestic news, Korea's military court sentenced a soldier to death on this Tuesday. A 23-year-old surgeon surnamed Im has been given the death penalty for killing 5 and wounding 7 soldiers in a shooting rampage last June. The military court says just because he suffered bullying in school and the army doesn't mean he can get a pardon for killing people, adding that Im didn't show any remorse leading up to the ruling, leaving the court no choice but to isolate him from society for good. Im's lawyer says they will appeal the court's decision. The case will now go to the High Military Court.
Moving on to other stories, reports are coming out that the U.S. and North Korea have been discussing meeting behind closed doors. This comes as the two sides on the surface have been blaming each other for the current deadlock in dialogue. For this next report, we have our Hwang Sung-hee.
Washington began the new year imposing more sanctions on North Korea. But behind the scenes, the two longtime foes have reportedly been discussing the prospects of restarting dialogue. Citing multiple sources, the Washington Post reported Monday that U.S. Special Envoy for North Korea Policy Sang Kim proposed to meet with North Korean officials in Beijing. This ahead of his trip to Tokyo last week for a trilateral meeting with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts. The report says the North offered to send Ri Yong-ho to Beijing or suggested the U.S. diplomat visit Pyongyang for a meeting with Kim Kye-kwan and Kang Seok-ju, who are both more senior in the foreign ministry than Ri. On a similar note, Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency reported Tuesday that Sang Kim's offer didn't materialize because the North insisted on holding the talks in Pyongyang. This comes as the two sides blame each other for the deadlock in dialogue. Following the trilateral meeting in Tokyo, the U.S. diplomat reiterated the conditions for talks.
North Koreans will need to demonstrate its commitment to denuclearization in a concrete manner before we can resume any serious negotiations.
North Korea lashed out over the weekend, saying Washington rejected its invitation. But the regime seems far from committed to giving up its nuclear ambitions. Recent satellite imagery shows fresh activity at North Korea's main nuclear plant, a possible indication a reactor there was being restarted. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Our focus is still on the Hermit Kingdom. A study by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization shows that an average North Korean consumed roughly 2,100 calories a day in 2011. That's only about 200 calories more than 50 years earlier. The UN recommends a daily calorie intake of 2,500 calories for adults, and the global average stands at nearly 2,900. North Koreans are also not eating balanced meals, as 2/3 of their calories come from grains, while their meat consumption has been cut in half since the Great Famine of the mid to late 1990s. To help you paint a clearer picture, an average South Korean consumes more than 3,300 calories a day.
Chinese Defense Minister Chang Wan-chan is in Seoul for a 3-day visit starting this Tuesday, and he is scheduled to hold talks with his South Korean counterpart Han Min-gu tomorrow. Topping the agenda of the meeting will be military and nuclear threats from Pyongyang and the current security situation on the peninsula. They will also discuss ways to further boost bilateral cooperation, including the establishment of a direct military hotline between the two countries. Chang is the third Chinese defense minister to visit South Korea, and his visit follows a trip to Beijing by Seoul's former defense chief Kim Kwan-jin in 2011. The last time a Chinese defense minister visited Seoul was in 2006.
Shifting our focus to the eastern Ukraine, where the situation is not improving at all. Officials in Washington are reportedly mulling over sending weapons to support the rebels fighting Russia-backed separatists. And the rebels are planning on raising their troop numbers too. Our Connie Lee reports.
The U.S. could be sending lethal aid to Ukraine to help its government fight off attacks by pro-Russian rebels.
We haven't taken options on or off the table. It's an ongoing discussion. Obviously, we take into account events on the ground, but I don't have anything to lay out for you in terms of internal deliberations.
The aid in the form of defensive weapons could include anti-tank, anti-air, and anti-mortar systems. Washington already provides non-lethal military equipment to Ukraine, but U.S. officials say the consideration to send lethal weapons shows Washington's growing frustration with Russia's continued support for rebels and the failed peace talks over the weekend. In a news conference Monday, the rebels blamed Kiev for the collapse of peace talks and said Russia was their true friend.
The hand stretched to us by Russia, by brotherly nation, is turning into a road of life. And today we can clearly see who are our friends and who are not.
The rebels have vowed to increase forces to up to 100,000 for their latest offensive strategy in East Ukraine. With this call, the pro-Russian separatists seek to intensify the 9-month-long conflict and push the government forces out of the east of the country. Violence has escalated in recent weeks, with both sides mobilizing more forces and more civilians losing their lives. According to the UN, more than 5,000 people have been killed in the conflict. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Business partners face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Na Hyung-kyung and Daniel Che.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
U.S. President Barack Obama has submitted a new spending plan for the next fiscal year. It's a near $4 trillion proposal taxing the rich to revive the middle class, but a lot of pundits are already saying it's a plan the Republican-controlled Congress is unlikely to pass. Arirang News' Song Ji-sun breaks down the numbers for us.
Practical, not partisan. That's how U.S. President Barack Obama described his budget proposal of nearly $4 trillion for the fiscal year 2016, which starts in October this year. As earlier outlined in State of the Union speech last month, Obama's plan is aimed at taxing the wealthy to support the middle class. It calls for a one-time 14% tax on an estimated $2.1 trillion of untaxed overseas income, while imposing a 19% tax on U.S. companies' future foreign earnings. Obama is also looking to close tax loopholes, such as one on carried interest, to help fund investments in infrastructure and education.
It gives Americans of every age the chance to upgrade their skills so they can earn higher wages. And it includes my plan to make 2 years of community college free for responsible students.
The budget calls for $612 billion in overall military spending, which includes funding to defeat Islamic State militants and support NATO and European allies against Russian aggression. The budget foresees a $474 billion deficit at 2.5% of the U.S. GDP, which is the lowest level since 2008. It's projected to stabilize at that level, reducing the deficit by $1.8 trillion over the next decade. The proposal requires approval from the Congress but faces a rocky road ahead, with House Speaker John Boehner rating Obama's plan as unbalanced, with more spending, more taxes, and more debt. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Koreans in their 20s and 30s might want to rethink their retirement plans. As a recent report shows, 4 in 10 in the cohort will have to work even after they reach the age of 65. The problem is the poor quality of their jobs. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
When 30-year-old Koreans become 65, the country's employment rate for the elderly is expected to top 40%, with more than 7.3 million people their age or older participating in economic activities. Now that points to a need for quality jobs for the elderly who are living in a country that has one of the most rapidly aging populations in the world. A recent report by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs says that the rise in the elderly employment rate comes as life expectancy increases, while most of them are unprepared for life after retirement. Korea's life expectancy stood at around 77 years in 2002, but it's expected to rise to 82.5 years in 2020. The country's elderly poverty rate, however, was close to 50% in 2010, the highest among OECD member states. The rate is also around 4 times higher than the OECD average of 12.4%. The report adds that more than 9 out of 10 Korean workers ages 65 or older had either temporary or part-time jobs in 2012. With more of the elderly expected to look for jobs in the future, it appears critical for policymakers to find a way to improve the job market for them. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea's consumer prices grew at a rate below 1% for the second straight month in January. Statistics Korea says the index rose just 0.8% last month from a year earlier. This is raising concerns about deflation, but the finance ministry ruled out such a possibility, attributing the slow price growth to falling global oil prices. They explain the over 20% drop in oil prices in January from a year ago was steep enough to offset a cigarette price hike last month. Core inflation, in the meantime, which excludes volatile oil and food prices, rose 2.4% last month from a year earlier.
Passion for education, namely Korean parents' passion for their children's education, is definitely world-class. The average Korean family spends nearly 7% of its income on learning. But the current economic conditions may have prompted households to redistribute their spending. Our Kim Ji-yeon has this story.
There are chimes at midnight, but high school students in Korea are often still packed with students studying their textbooks. Some shell out big money to follow a separate curriculum offered by private academies in addition to their class materials. It shows just how much Koreans prioritize education, as attending a good university has a tremendous impact on a person's career. However, in recent months, the bad economy has started to have an effect on how much Koreans spend on education. In fact, the Bank of Korea and the Education Ministry say private academy expenses tumbled to a 3-year low last year. During the January to November period, money spent on private education academies dropped 0.8% from the same period last year to $7.3 billion. The number of students studying overseas also dropped from 262,000 in 2011 to less than 220,000 last year. Overseas education spending plunged 14% last year compared to the previous year, amounting to $372 million, a 9-year low. An official from the Education Ministry says students are heading to English-speaking countries with lower living expenses. The number of Korean students studying in Western countries has waned. In particular, those in Britain have dropped by nearly 60%. In stark contrast, Korean students studying in the Philippines jumped 52% to more than 7,000 last year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
In the trade front, Korean products are gaining a stronger foothold in China. Locally made goods accounted for nearly 10% of China's total imports last year, or about $190 billion. That's up from 9.2% in 2013 and puts Korea in first place in terms of market share for the second straight year. Japan came in second, followed by the U.S. and Taiwan. The Korea International Trade Association attributes the strong presence of Korean products to an increase in demand for semiconductors and auto parts. China imported over $50 billion worth of semiconductors from Korea and nearly $4 billion worth of Korean auto parts last year. Tablet PCs were all the rage when they were first released around 5 years ago, but their popularity is starting to steadily drop. According to market research firm IDC, global shipments of tablets suffered a decline last quarter for the first time ever to some 76 million units. That's a 3.2% drop from the previous year. Shipments for the whole of last year increased only slightly at 4.4%, which is far lower than the over 50% increase posted back in 2013. The industry watcher attributed the fall to the wide range of competitive forces. Another factor is that users don't upgrade tablets as frequently as they do with their smartphones. IDC predicts the market will start growing again this year with the introduction of technology innovations that will help tablets regain positive growth. Creating something new usually requires teamwork, well-organized engineering and developmental support, of course. But for one local researcher, determination and thinking outside the box is all it took. He has nearly 100 inventions under his belt, and our Kim Min-ji had a chance to talk to him.
It looks like a scene from Spider-Man. The device, made with parts of several vacuum cleaners, enables a full-grown man to climb a wall. You might think creating something like this will require many hands with an understanding of scientific theory and technical skills, but it was made by one person on the ground floor of this very average-looking building. The space is a lab of researcher Oh Jang-geun, who has spent nearly 3 decades of his life here, working on objects ranging from the functional to the bizarre.
If I come across a new technology while reading or surfing the net, I map it out. Then I think about what it could be used for and what types of people would need it.
Oh is responsible for nearly 100 inventions that include sophisticated vehicles like hovercrafts and human-powered aircrafts, and the unusual, such as this fighter robot. A person can ride it and control the arms, and anything can be fired from the pistols. Oh may be a bit eccentric, but he does have a humane side, and he is mostly concerned about people in need.
I've made customized wheelchairs for the disabled. Everyone has a different disability, so the one I made was to suit the individual.
What's more is that Oh isn't interested in commercializing his creations or making a fortune with them, and this is just something he does because he enjoys it. His latest project is a walking robot, which he says is the first step to making a wearable robot.
사람이 걸어갈 때 무릎 굽혀지는 거, 발목 굽혀지는 거.
Oh hopes that someday this smart gadget will boost the strength of those who find it hard to stand, walk, or use their legs. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
You know, Mr. Oh is someone that I would like to have as a grandfather. I love my grandfather, but I think it would have been so much fun growing up with all these gadgets and inventions.
Right. They say anyone can have a brilliant idea in the shower, but it's what you do after you wipe yourself clean that matters. And it looks like he has a good, strong follow-through. Speaking of that, we have musicians, of course, who have a lot of strong work ethic, of course. Korean classical musicians go abroad at a very young age to study music, and often they make their marks on the international music scene.
Well, today our Im Yoon-hee introduces us to 2 such musicians who are also making waves here, right here in Korea. Take a look.
The sweet, sorrowful sounds of the violin, blended with the percussive accents of the classical guitar. The reputable guitar duo Lee Sung-woo and Oliver Fartash-Naini have joined forces with one of Korea's leading young violinists, Shin Ji-ah. They've collaborated on the recently released album Canto Antigo, a collection of 16 Latin American folk pieces.
It's a chance for me to reflect through a variety of pieces. In particular, with this project, I heard echoes of the Korean cultural piece Arirang, and I grew fond of it.
The trio is set to play in Seoul this Valentine's Day. Another young classical musician taking the spotlight is pianist Im Hyun-jung. In 2011, she was the youngest pianist to undertake the complete cycle of Beethoven's piano sonatas, an accomplishment that put her front and center on the global classical music stage. The one-night-only performance includes works by Beethoven, Bach, and Rachmaninoff. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
Today is one of those special days in the calendar. We have some special words on it. Ipchun is the word we have in Korea here, which is the beginning of spring, but with spring comes the arrival of fine yellow dust from China as well, unfortunately.
That's right, Ipchun tomorrow, right?
Right.
That's right. And I believe Michelle is standing by at the Weather Center to tell us about some of the foods that could help wash the consumed dust away. Right, Michelle?
Good evening, guys. And yes, and aside from the yellow dust, spring is one of my favorite seasons with flowers blooming and the mild temperatures and my birthday coming up, of course. But it can be hard to enjoy the season with the dust hanging around. So here are some of the foods to try to help you get it out of your system and feel healthier. Now, pork has lots of unsaturated fatty acids and seaweed has dietary fiber that will help you let out the dust from your body, while balloon flower is an expectorant and helps you expel mucus before it gets into your lungs. So try them out and stay healthy. Now, with that in mind, let's see how the weather looks like. The week will be mostly clear with the continuing dry weather conditions. But let's hope the rain on the southern coast tomorrow will lift it. Now, with that in mind, let's go over to our readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off the Wednesday morning at -3 and gets up high to 5 degrees in the afternoon, while Daegu and Busan will top to 8 and 6 degrees. And to other regions, Jeju Island gets up high at 6, Dokdo hits down to 4, while Wankungang dips low to -6 degrees. Well, that's all for now, Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's Early Edition at 6. Thanks for watching. This has been Nai Hyun-kyung.
And this is Daniel Che. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow, same time.